From Oslo, Norway, BI Business School.
Renewable energy resources. And before we look forward, we wanted to look a bit backward and see why Statoil has succeeded. So then we look at the focus on the project development and always taking in mind of those core culture values in decision making. And as well as over the years, you acquired a core competency in making projects in a very harsh environment with advanced technologies. And lastly, with presence in about 30 countries, you have a well adaptation to global cultures and to overcome political risks. So today, we're very glad to be here presenting Statoil moving forward. And with me today, I have Henrik, Howard, Knut, and myself, Eskil. To start with our main goal of the strategy, help in shaping Statoil towards a renewable future. And running through some key financial objectives are achieving an IRR of 11%, achieve cost savings up to 50% over the total lifetime of the project, and have a risk-managed project that we know for at least 80% certainty would deliver value to Statoil, and have an entry strategy that are scalable for future growth. Doing that, we identify some key challenges. It's a highly competitive market. The distribution in emerging markets are either state-owned or regulated by established players. And to find projects that you are able to leverage on your core competency can be hard. So that makes us 3 questions. Which emerging country to enter? And how to use existing core competency, and through which business model. So first, we're starting to evaluate our entry to emerging markets. We of course took the underlying assumption. It needs to be attractive in terms of wind speed. But moving forward, we looked at a strategy fit. Do we have existing business there today? And are we able to capitalize on our core competency there? And then we look at the profitability, of course important in every investment decision. And when entering emerging markets, we have also to look at the political risk. And doing that, we analyze several different rankings, all from democracy, ease of doing business, corruption, etc. And lastly, we look at the expected market size. So we see what's the consumption today and scale it for the future with the expected GDP growth. And starting with 14 countries, we quickly narrow it down to these 5. And analyzing those further, we see that Brazil is by far the most attractive country to enter. That's due to the strategy fit. You have, first of all, a business there in oil and gas today. And also, you are able to find some cool landscapes there. You can use advanced technologies in order to capitalize on differentiate you. And also, we see the expected market size are growing at a more rapid rate than the global average. But of course, entering Brazil, there are a significant amount of political risk. So that is something we will derive more about later in our presentation. But now I'll give the word to Henrik, who will talk more about our entry strategy to Brazil.
Thank you, Eskil. The second phase of the entry plan is to allocate the optimal geostrategical position in the domestic Brazilian market. In order to do so, we did a comprehensive, in-depth analysis looking at different elements. We looked at the presence of Statoil today with the oil and gas in Brazil. We evaluated the competitive market. We looked at the population density. And we also looked at the territorial areas where we see the biggest potential of Statoil utilizing their core competencies. Let me elaborate on this point. Our fundamental understanding of Statoil and its values is that you see potential where many others see problems. It is a fact that in areas of high forest density and mountain ranges, the demand from manufacturers is lower. Here we see opportunity to capitalize on this and get a land premium because of the lower cost in these areas. We also see back on your unique, innovative history and therefore see that it's feasible to do this. When you summarize all of these criteria, you see the districts of Bahia and Sergipe being the most optimal. Both of these areas have flat landscapes in competitive markets today that you can penetrate, and they also have some interesting mountain areas that is interesting in the long term. Now, let's look at the risk of going to the Brazilian market and the onshore wind market for the very first time. You got to be honest, you don't have the experience in this field. You are facing some political risks, and there's some uncertainties in terms of distribution. We believe that we have found the strategy which will mitigate this risk the best, and that will make the transition into the onshore wind market the most optimal. That is by going into a joint venture with Statkraft. Here we will take advantage of their strong global position in the onshore wind market and also their position in Brazil. So let's see how they will do it and how they will mitigate our risks. In terms of the constraint expertise, they have 2 active wind parks, both in Bahia and Sergipe today. Here we'll see they have a lot of knowledge in terms of PPA and other important factors that you can effectivize and just go straight to the point. We also worked together with Statkraft previously and has turned out positively, so we are sure that the cooperation will also be positive in the future. In terms of political risk, you can fragmentize the elements into different factors. You see that the ease of doing business given by the World Bank Brazil comes out really bad in this element. We ranked 133rd in the whole world. This means like the ease of making contracts, getting permits and stuff like that. It's fair to say that the presence of Statkraft today will definitely mitigate this risk. We're also open to going into a partnership or giving a share to a local developer in the future as well to further better these odds. In terms of distribution network, we see ourselves utilizing the current channels of Statkraft and also taking advantage of their strong relations with counterparties in the district. We also see ourselves in the long run combining the non-renewable and the renewable resources and collaborating with these two. So, now I will give the word to Howard, which will talk further about our recommendation here.
Thank you, Henrik. Yeah, so I'll take you to strategy and as well as a joint venture. So, why should Statkraft agree to a joint venture? Well, we looked at 4 facts. And it's delivery security to the market. Here Statoil can come in, and when there is no wind and the windmills can't produce electricity, Statoil's gas can also come in to help. So there is a constant 24/7 supply of energy. The other one is more capital means further expansion, and this can go faster. Being two partners can increase this. As well as building wind farms in places and areas where it hasn't been done before, as Henrik said, with the expertise of Statoil. Then it's also the reducing costs. So the windmills will be bought from external providers. This is not something that is in our value chain. This will be bought from, for example, as VIG, which is located in Brazil, due to the fact that transportation costs would be lower. So let's assume that there is no wind. And how are we supposed to supply the grid with electricity? Well, one way is to bundle. This meaning that we are bundling gas and wind. So when there is no wind, we will supply the grid with gas. So there is electricity supply 24/7, meaning that our reputation and our customer will be happy. So the other alternative is storage capacity. In 2016, Statkraft launched a battery looking like this. It contains 3 megawatts of power. The advantages of doing this is charging this up with windcraft is the ability to time the market. When demand is high and prices are high, we can sell out, increase revenue, as well as hedge against no production. Instead of going with gas, we can now do the batteries and pull it out to the market to supply the grid 24/7, and therefore building up our reputation as a great provider. So, the long-term vision. The long-term vision for Statoil is leverage on a joint venture with Statkraft. Doing this through economy of scale, connecting and combining information platform to learn from each other, both organizations, and reducing investments like you did offshore by 40 to 70%. Here's also one of the estimates from how big the wind sector is going to be in Brazil in 2035. So the long-term vision is to expand to South America. After we have gone into Brazil, succeeded there, there's also a good reason for going abroad. Now we know the environment, we know the people, the climate, and and expanding towards South America. So, the strategy overview. The market is Brazil. Due to the fact that we have a growing demand for electricity, we have good prices, and as well as wind. When it comes to technology, we're not really innovating technology in that matter. We are taking, or for example, the batteries might be new to the industry, but we are combining technologies to get a strategic advantage to the market. And also the business model is the key aspect, a key part of this strategy. As we know, Statoil has not done a lot of onshore windmills, but Statkraft has. They are the market-leading company within Europe and within renewable energy. So why not use them to get their expertise onshore wind? And this way we can reduce risk as well as make Norway a key player within renewable energy worldwide. Now we'll pass the word to Knut, who will talk about impact.
Thank you, Howard. So in order to fully understand the process of launching windmills in Brazil, we have analyzed 14 of Statkraft's previous projects in Norway, in Sweden, and in United Kingdom. And most interestingly, we found the time-lapse from the investment decision until the first day of production to be around 3 years. So we used these facts in combination with the things that Howard and Henrik took us through to set up a sort of a timeline for the coming period, where we find partnering up with Statkraft is something we should start working on quite fast in order to get the project planning for the wind farm in Bahia going. In 2 years' time, the partnership with Statkraft should have been strengthened, and also your competence in onshore wind market should have been growing. So you're ready to launch the second project in Sergipe. On a longer term, we see the opportunities, as mentioned, for expansion further in Brazil and also in South America, as well as new opportunities coming from energy storage. Looking over the coming 20 to 25 years, our team has estimated the net present value of these two first projects to be around $29 million, with an internal rate of return around 13.84%. As you can see on the graph showing the accumulated discounted cash flow from the project, we must make some initial investments. And this will be financed over the same debt ratio as the rest of your company today, 23%, as well as Statkraft taking their share in the financing. These estimates are based on quite conservative assumptions, so we think that the numbers you'll see in real life should be higher, both regarding the NPV and the internal rate of return. Looking at the revenue side of this business model, we see certain risk factors, especially the energy prices in Brazil and the economic growth in Brazil. So we took these two factors and ran a sensitivity analysis on them. We did a Monte Carlo analysis with 50,000 iterations to see how the fluctuation in the energy prices and the GDP growth affect the NPV of these two pilot projects. And we came up under fair assumptions that it has an 85% likeliness of netting a positive NPV. Talking about risk factors, I just give a brief view in how the shifting demand might affect this project. And we think our strategy is quite robust. Henrik discussed the political risks and how the partnership with Statkraft and growing Statoil's competence in Brazil should help mitigate this risk. And when considering new projects, safety is always a concern. But by including safety experts in every phase of the project, we think we're taking control over this risk and should be able to make the project a reality. So in order to sum up our presentation, we would like to give you some key takeaways. And first and foremost, we would like to establish Brazil as the base for Statoil's entry into the onshore wind market. Next up, we want to establish a partnership with Statkraft in order to capitalize on the synergy effects between these two large players, especially in the longer run. And lastly, from the two pilot projects, we have computed the IRR to be 13.84%. And remember, this is just the pilot projects. Imagine what the future might hold. So with that, we'd like to thank you for your attention and open the floor for any questions you might have.
Thank you. Very interesting points you cover there. You've picked Statkraft as the partner here. Could you reflect a little bit about you mentioned a little bit versus it's a Norwegian company versus a local player, but could you also reflect your thoughts on the expansion strategy and the role of Statkraft? Are you thinking that Statkraft would follow an expansion into Chile and Argentina, or would there be another partner?
We first think about it with maybe a couple, when we make a joint venture with Statkraft, we also think about maybe bringing a third player in order to get more into the market, maybe at the distribution side, because we've seen that have been done before with Statoil and Statkraft, maybe a 40-40 with a 20 on a distributor in order to get full contact with the Brazilian market. But expanding further, we see Statoil as operating and running the windmill farms. So in that way, we are always possible to sort of buy out Statkraft as we have done on other offshore projects already. So we see that's an opportunity in the long run. But then first, we want to enter with Statkraft in order to get their competency and their creating synergies from that.
Again, thank you for a good presentation. So the business school question. It's good to see the IRR above 11%, which is a target that we have. But how do you view IRR versus NPV in terms of a key denominator or profitability?
Again, you said how we...
How do you view the strengths and the weaknesses of IRR as a measure as opposed to NPV?
Yes, we assess the political risk as a discount factor. We add in a political risk premium in the discount factor in order to get our NPV derived from sort of the... You said that Norwegian government bond is risk-free, but the Brazilian are not. To see the difference there in order to put into the risk premium, the country risk premium, in order to get a correct discount factor. So the discount factor, I think, was about 12%. So in that case, we make a positive NPV in our base case. So we see NPV as, of course, the most important factor to gain value to Statoil, to the share price and everything. So we see that the NPV is the most important factor, but the IRR is also to give an sort of a feel of how the project is.
What would you say about the scalability of this model? When and if you succeed in first Brazil and then South America, is this a viable model for a rapid expansion, or how do you view that?
We see in the first phase here, when you go to Bahia and Sergipe, we're going to take a safe approach, going in the landscapes which are competitive of the day-to-day. And then we'll get the synergetic effects of the two, having the opportunity to then go to mountain areas and forest areas, which can be the strength in the long term. But now, in the starting phase, we will have a moderate approach, take it time by time, and see that in the future we have to expand from there.
And to add on to this, we see that with a joint venture with Statkraft, you have more of the experience, you have more of the capital to expand further, and that is why we are also doing the joint venture to increase in scale faster and not doing this alone.
I want a question around the regulatory landscape. Did you do any evaluations of the regulatory landscape and the ability to actually access the market?
Yeah, but I looked at the landscapes, and Bahia is particularly interesting. You know, Bahia is the key, from many reports mentioned as the key player on the growing market in onshore wind energy. The majority of the land, it's flat, and there is the very competitiveness is. If you see these two parts that has a square around it, that's mountain areas which has no huge competition today. Here is where we want to implement over time, and we have the technology to earn the premiums of the land due to the lower cost because it's no big demand. We think the Statoil can do this because when they look back on their unique, innovative history, they always manage to come up with technology that other players have not. And that's where we see them in the future in this area in Bahia.
And just to add on regarding the auction license, that we see that the Brazilian government every year auction around a large amount of license in order to get more renewable energy into the country. So that's, I think, where the partnership comes with Statkraft in order to get those auctions license.
Have you also looked into the stakeholder picture with local stakeholders in addition to the political stakeholders?
Yes. As we said, we are open for putting in a third part into the joint venture. That's sort of especially into the distribution of the energy. And we have seen a company called Sorry, my Brazilian is not the best. Coabre, I guess, that's a local distributor in Bahia, for example, that we are able to get in sort of to assess the political risk, because we have seen earlier when the oil crash hit in the Mexico Gulf, a lot of the Norwegian companies were just sort of pulled up when the oil price dropped. So in order to hedge sort of against those political risks, we think that's a good idea actually to put in a third part in the joint venture.
Could I have a question also on, you're choosing a particular physical landscape to go into. Did you reflect how the mountain terrain versus the highly competitive space of onshore wind? Any reflections on whether you're choosing a difficult solution in a competitive area?
Yeah, we're definitely choosing the more difficult experience, and that's because we believe in Statoil and your unique, innovative history. When you go into mountain areas, there's a lot of risk, you can say, in terms of, particularly in terms of transportation into the area itself, in installing the craft and operating it. That will have a higher cost profit. But if we can be the first player to really master this kind of climate, we can have so much premiums and advantages that the other players maybe are not able to adapt to as quickly, and we can gain a position in that term.
And if I may add, going back to the scalability question, when we have this technology working in the complex area in Brazil, I think it's possible also to scale it up and use it other places to take advantage of like different difficult terrain.
So the same question goes to this team. What do you think will be the hardest or toughest leadership challenge for the executive team of Statoil to pursue this strategy?
As all executives in Statoil, I think it would be, first of all, the safety risk going into a new market in South America. And we know that safety is very important in Statoil. And as well as to see that leading the people towards it through their culture values as well. But to gain sort of I think the most challenges as well is to find the technology that can differentiate Statoil from the other competitors. And that way also, as you said, the larger the turbines, the lower the cost, right? So in that sense, also to look at making a group of engineers that can really research on how to gain a competitive margin in that market, I think would be the biggest challenge of the executives to gain that competitive advantage.
It's also important to build bridges between Statkraft and Statoil so we can reach the full potential of the synergies together. And here they also have an important role.
If this plan doesn't work out, do you have an exit strategy in place? And what would that exit strategy be?
You're talking particularly about the corporation joint venture with Statkraft or the auction license?
Right, the joint venture.
The joint venture, yeah. So the exit strategy, okay, if it don't work out, I think we will look into other partnerships because we think partnership is the right business model when entering Brazil. So that will be looking at more local competitors. As we see in oil and gas, you both Petrobras, and see acquisition may be possible as well, but you need to transfer that knowledge you don't have today when entering Brazil.
What do you think some of the costs would be if you had to exit this joint venture?
Yeah, so regarding the cost, if you go into Brazil and have to pull out, I think we have calculated some cost on sort of scrapping the turbines, if that's what you're looking at.
No, I meant more in terms of the partnership with Statkraft. What do you think some of the costs would be for you as a company?
For the company Statoil exiting with Statkraft, yeah, that would be in first hand the cost of, okay, you are developing a base, you are putting a lot of research into it, so that's sort of the exit cost is sort of all the research and all the cooperation you are doing in front of. That would be the total cost of exiting, because if you're not, the partnership doesn't work out, we won't start building and won't start have those physical material costs.
And a quick follow-up, what do you think would be the entry cost of because they are already there? So do you think that we have to pay something in advance or put money on the table, so to speak, to be able to profitably be building on their already established position?
Yes, if you open a slide for auction license as well.
Which one?
Yeah, okay, so of course the entry cost will be the research, and then buy the auction license is of course the first entry cost in Brazil, and then you need to gather partnerships with a distributor, which will also be a huge part of the entry cost, and building the infrastructure around your windmill farm. So that would be sort of the largest entry cost.
But purely and towards Statkraft, they are already there. don't you think they will ask to be paid for us benefiting into their already gained position? Yes or no question, actually.
Yeah, but I think Statkraft see many of the same synergy effects as Statkraft, as for Statoil, your company, and they also would like to kind of maintain the relation with your company, as we saw in the UK with the offshore windmills, where you're taking over the operation from Statkraft because they're pulling out from the offshore part of their business model. So I also think they see many, to answer your question, I think they see many of the same synergy effects, and yeah, as we discussed.
And to add on to that, I also think that by reducing, as you say, competitiveness between Statoil and Statkraft within Brazil, you would be more competitive against the other competitors.
I have two questions. One is when you are setting up the wind farm in a quite challenged area, you mentioned very well that it's a challenge to do the installation. But have you thought about the cost of connecting to the grid from those rural area, and thinking about what kind of cost that will add on to the project? That's one question. The other one is, have you looked into the competitor analysis? What you believe is our strongest competitor in Brazil?
You can go through the cost first.
You can go
Yeah. Well, regarding connecting to the grid from the more rural areas, we think the cost will be higher than for connecting from the easier kind of landscape. But for the two pilot projects, we have looked more specifically into the to the easier areas. So we think that going to the more advanced and complex landscapes, that's further ahead in time. So firstly, we'd like to approach the easier ones, where the costs are lower, and therefore it's easier to profit from the project.
And regarding the highly competitive market, we see that especially in Bahia as well, there are the large number of competitors in the Bahia area. So Brazil is one of the largest countries also today on onshore wind, and they have also set up for the future that they want to be one of the largest in renewable energy. So I think that's what the competition you see at General Electric over there today, and other large companies who produce windmill farms.
You were talking about bundling, gas bundling, and also batteries to around intermittency issues. What were your reflections? Is it most important that the project itself delivered balanced energy, or are there other elements, or is it more important that Statoil as a producer can deliver the building blocks of balanced energy in total to the market?
We see that the most important really is to build a reputation, to be able to supply the market so you don't have any cuts. So what if there is no wind? Should you say to your customers, no, there's no wind this week, you will get the electricity next week? That is not something we want to do. We want to be the best player out there to provide, and that is why we have bundling with gas, and that is why we have, as well as looking into the electricity storaging, so that it won't be any cuts. So we are looking at putting the most effort into delivering wind power, of course, but as a reserve to deliver the product, we have bundling and storage.
And that's also to answer your question, right? We need to bring something to the table to Statkraft as well. That's sort of the bundling when we come in with oil and gas, and it's also the possibility with the battery storage. But we know that there are, in the short term, we see that the response time of regulating power between wind and gas are quite high. So in the longer run, that's why we look at the battery instead of sort of regulating power with gas and wind, because there are certain problems in the time that it takes to respond between the different energies.
I think we have time for one more question. So what's your most important learning from this case study?
I think one of the important learnings is the approach you take when you have to learn a lot about a new kind of project, and also like the techniques you have to look over a lot of information in a short period of time and picking out the important things. And I think we have managed to do that in a well way. So we have used the correct sources. One of the sources is the World Energy Council related to the UN. We think picking out the right sources and use the information to come up with a project is the techniques is the most important thing we learned.